Okay, episode 8. Now, Mama's back at her home, which is in the red light district, which, although they didn't mention, usually coincide with the entertainment district as well. Now, what I'm gonna mention in reality are historical, so don't go around looking for the location that I'm mentioning nowadays and expect the kind of red light district that you see nowadays, because as I mentioned before, those places got shut down after 1949, so they're not functioning as what they are. However, historically, for the past maybe 600 years, red light district in the capital city of China in Beijing is actually quite close to the Imperial Palace. It's about a 30-minute walk, or even shorter if you walk faster. You go out the front main gate and then you just go south, and you'll come across the district on the left-hand side, so it's not that far away. Quite close to the city center, literally. Basically, historically, in Asia, entertainers were valued in the same level as people working in, red light district. Actors nowadays get paid a huge sum, they are widely, quote-unquote, respected, but back then, actors were the lowest of the low in terms of social status. Nobody really respected them. Although they did earn a lot, they were grouped together in the same lot as prostitutes, and the line is very blurry. It's very hard to tell which one is which. You have essentially courtesans, entertainers, and also dubbed as prostitutes, and the other way around. So they actually work in the same district, and a lot of high-end brothels will offer services such as this. When it comes to the whole district in general, they usually are if you think about a shopping mall, that kind of deal. You'd have your high-end stores, you'd have your mid-range store, and then your discount store. And in the red light district, there's no exception actually. There's high-end brothels where, it's almost an exclusive club, like I mentioned last time. It's a members only kind of deal, and you need someone to introduce you. Otherwise, they don't really take in new customers. And then there's middle-end ones and lower-end ones. It all depends on bar of entry, how easy it is to get in and what kind of services were offered there. You don't go in just for, say, sexual relief. A lot of the times, these courtesans will have other skills that they're good at. Some of them might be good singers, some of them might be good at playing music instruments, some of them are literate, very literate, poets, writers. Some of them are good at playing, chess or Go, so there's various reasons. And for the high-end ones, like the one that Maomao is associated with over here, generally you go in and spend money first before these courtesans will take you on as a customer. But then again, because the line is very blurry, you don't have a distinct line drawn as to where your service ends. And more often than not, if you worked in this district for long enough, then your whole kind of worldview and morality will shift a little bit. The madam here is trying to sell Maomao, and all her sisters seemed pretty okay with it. Mostly because they basically don't really have the same kind of assumption as quote-unquote normal people anymore. So they've been working in this industry long enough. They thought this might be a good thing. You're providing for yourself in a way where you probably couldn't otherwise. And that might just be their genuine assumption. They might not mean ill will, even though they're selling you. Part of the reason why usually people in this industry were looked down upon throughout history was pretty much also the same thing because of their kind of different understanding of morality compared to your quote-unquote normal people. Historically, there are usually two sources for people who work in this industry. One of them were people who were desperate, people who actually needed money. Slavery was officially outlawed in China in 1912. However, prostitution was only outlawed in 1949. Although slavery was only outlawed in 1912, for the longest time in Chinese history, there wasn't a huge slave workforce, mainly because Chinese kept slaves for different reasons. And it's kind of a hard thing to describe, but some of these subtleties were lost in translation, as the idea of a slave in China or like in Japan would be closer to what the West know as indentured servants. You are in debt, therefore others own you. But then if you are able to pay off your debt, others might not own you anymore. So quite literally, in some sense, everyone who's under a system would be considered, if you go for the broadest definition, all the Japanese samurais were slaves to their lords until either they rebel or, they decide that they're not their lords anymore. So the kind of connotation when we think about slaves in the West, especially in North America, as humans being subject to livestock level and property level dehumanization in the more modern era, it wasn't really a thing in Asia. You have this new show that came out that had to change its name. Mainly because, slaves are a very touchy issue, and slavery is a very touchy issue in North America. But the reason why people didn't think too much when creating that show in Japan was because the same term probably didn't mean anything with the same kind of gravity as it would in North American context. With that said, most people who work in this industry, basically, as I mentioned, came from two sources. One of them was that they themselves needed money. They were desperate for money. Therefore, they'd sell themselves or be sold by family for the desperately needed money. So because the idea of a loan wasn't really that prominent, selling yourself for money, selling yourself into, I guess, what you can only describe as slavery would have been seen as a viable option. So that was one source. Other source will be if your family committed a crime, and it's a pretty severe crime. If the male members of your family were executed for crimes, then female members sometimes would be sold into prostitution. So those were the two sources. People would be desperate, but after a while, they basically morality will have to shift. They would have to adapt. I don't want to go into too much detail in this case, but in this case, you basically have this explanation as to why the guy was being poisoned. And that shows exactly how people will get out of working in this industry. Usually people will offer to buy them, not as a menial slaves. Usually they're bought as concubine or house entertainer. Like if a prominent and rich enough family, they want to keep some entertainer full time, then they buy them. Now the big difference is that people got paid for these kind of jobs. But as I was saying last episode as well, compared to these kind of work in servitude, life of a so-called free person probably wasn't that good anyways. You had to worry about survival. So by comparison, this wasn't nearly as bad in the minds of many in the past. Now, it's interesting that Mao Mao said that I'm gonna be sold to a buyer once I came back. That's exactly how people wound up in this industry and were kept in this industry. Essentially, you were short on money, and in Mao Mao's case, she kind of asked for it. But if you're short on money, they'll try to basically make you more in debt. Therefore, your earning probably wouldn't cover your debt. Then if you're continuously in debt, then you have to work in this industry continuously, and then they might sell you to a different place, and then you have to work there continuously. But then again, although the whole idea of person being sold sounds pretty horrible, you can actually see in this show that anonymity is probably much better compared to everywhere else. They had a bath in place. Pretty lavish looking bath in place, whereas most people, as I was mentioning, probably only had a bucket for bathing. And all those makeup and everything else, jewelry, so on, they were expensive. So it's interesting for Mao Mao to make a comparison, saying that the red light district is no different from the rear palace, which in some sense they were not really different. Only difference being rear palace would serve only one customer, which was the emperor. There's a reason why rear palace would never be short of people who came in, as servants and so on. usually because, comparatively, life was hard. People didn't have an option, so this was their only option in many sense. And what's interesting about this show is that it doesn't shy away from these kind of things. Some shows, they play these kind of situation and scenarios for cringe, but over here, this is pretty accurate. Compared to whatever, the kind of lifelong confinement kind of work of all the servants in the Real Palace, their depiction of the red light district is pretty accurate. You go in debt, and then somebody might offer to buy you or pay you off so that you are no longer required to work in an industry where you might sell your body. So that's basically pretty accurate. And then once again, it's entertainment district. So red light district aside, there are like opera houses, there's like tea houses around, and they may be called upon for other work, like works other than just staying in place. And you know what? Gyokyo's reaction to seeing like Mao Mao and Jinshi go through the misunderstanding, that's quite understandable. Mao Mao might grew up in the red light district, where it's essentially also the entertainment and business district. So there would have been an abundance of entertainment in many ways. Whereas Gyokyo's in the Real Palace, this might be the only form of entertainment that she got. They don't really mention it in the show. I don't think they'll mention it in detail in the show, or if anything, it wouldn't come up as like a plot point for like a plot point twist or anything, but Kyokyo's only 20 by this point. It's in like character info inside the novel. She was 19 when she gave birth to her daughter, and she's only 20 right now. So despite her being one of the most powerful women, presumably in the entire country, she's like a 20-year-old, barely like late teen, like early adulthood. So it makes perfect sense that she wants something entertaining to her. And unlike other people, people who work in the entertainment district, she couldn't go out and just like seek entertainment and go to anywhere else, because the Real Palace is pretty confining. You don't get to leave unless like it's anything specific. You don't go to an opera, like leave the palace and go to an opera. That's not an option. And with our like little mini vacation arc out of the way, we're really gonna go into a long series of events next that tie into one another in the next few episodes. Starting with episode 9, which interestingly features another person that's named after a historic figure. So I'm gonna explain that in more detail in that episode. Of course, later on, we would come back to the entertainment district. I'll go into detail as to how entertainment districts are organized in that episode.